in the 13th century, while for the English poetry, it has a big influence on the Imagist movement of the early 20th century, which is Imagism. So for Imagism, it emphasized the clear and direct language, and it was like a reaction for the Romantic and the Victorian poetry. For the Imagists, your language of your poetry could be symbolic, but if you can write your poetry in a few words, then those few words are enough. So it could be symbolic and direct at the same time. For the names of the poets and authors who are considered as imagists, we have Emmy Lowell, T.S. Eliot, Hilda Dolittle, James Joyce, and William Carlos Williams.
Okay, thank
That's
you very much. Although
Thank
I have some few things that I would like to say about your sharing and the sharing of Amna. Amna insisted that the persona is supposed to have a kind of subjectivity, which is, yeah, a little bit true, but they never cared about the subjectivity or the objectivity of the persona. But it might appear more than the persona in the haiku literature, and I agree on this. Regarding your sharing, there is something which is, you mentioned about symbolism, that it can be part of the poem, and this is completely not true. What I mean that one of the basics of Imagism, that it is not, the image is not supposed neither symbolic nor abstract, no symbolism. They rejected symbolism and abstraction at all in their own poetry. It is one of their own principles that is not supposed to be symbolic nor abstract. Maybe some other people, they can explain it or they see it as symbolic, but they never intended to put symbols in their own images. Nadia, please. Nadia Siam.
Yes, hello everyone. So I don't know if it will be considered a sharing or not, but I want to read like 3 haikus that I liked that I read, if it is okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, before I read them, I want to say that I kind of searched about the American haiku and wanted to kind of spot the differences between it and the Japanese one. And from what I noticed, so it wasn't like directly stated, but I noticed that like the American haikus are not rigid in form like the Japanese one, because like the Japanese one,
that's right. Regarding the number of syllables as well as the number of, it doesn't have a rigid structure like the Japanese. Yes.
Yeah, even like when Japanese ones are translated, like their rigid structure is like lost. So yeah, so the American one is like more free in its form. And I also noticed that the Japanese one is more vivid in, or like how to say, is closer to what we talked about last time, the Imagism thing. So it's literally like drawing an image, but the American one, I noticed that sometimes they just like talk about a feeling, like about describing fear. So you can't really draw like it. But for the Japanese one, yeah, they are like easily imagined inside the mind and easily drawn. So the ones I will read are translated from Japanese. So the first one is well, likens the moon in the sky to the eye, to the human eye. So it goes as posing between clouds, the moon rests in the eyes of its beholders.
Yes. What do you think of this? What is your attitude, your personal attitude to what you have just read?
I think it's beautiful and nothing more, nothing less.
Right. Okay. There is a poem, a very famous poem, haiku poem, Japanese poem about someone who woke up, and woke up early in the morning and came down from the bed, and he discovered that the comb of his dead wife is under his own heel. So the whole poem, it reflects that there was a piercing sting in his own foot, and when he looked down, he found that it was the comb of his dead wife. Many people tried to to explain what is the meaning of this, but actually, I cannot recall the exact words, but this is the meaning, right? They try to explain that he is still thinking of his own dead wife, or otherwise, how come he keeps his own the comb of her own, يعني her own comb, and it is still around his own bed, things like that. Don't try to explain. Your explanation will be your own interpretation of what you see, but this is not the intention of the writer. You have to understand that the image is portrayed as a concrete image that can be painted, and that's all, right? But the interpretation, it refers to the reader. Yes. Are you going to read something else?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah, please.
Well, it goes as vivid sunlight plays hide and seek games with garden trees, gold coins all around.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. The last one.
Yeah, the last one is not Japanese. It's by Rumi, which like he wrote this before the haiku was even a thing, but it's beautiful, I think. Let the waters settle, you will see stars and moon mirrored in your being.
Well, I'm not going to ask Nadia only, but I'm going to ask all of you. Why don't you try to write your own haiku, yani your own imagism? It is very short, right? Only one sentence, might be two lines, but one complete sentence, one complete sentence. Try to write your own haiku.
I wrote one before, Doctor.
Nah,
I wrote one before.
did you? Let me hear.
Yes.
Ahmed.
The sun has set. There are no stars in the sky over the Sea of Gaza.
Wow, good. Okay. Khulud Balata, yes. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Ahmed. Khulud.
Well, hello everybody. Well, I'm not sharing actually something about the radical relationship between the.
I hardly can hear you. It would be, do us a favor if you can raise up your voice, please.
I'm not sure what's the problem. Can
All
you hear
right,
me now?
maybe you need to come closer to the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not sharing something like about the radical relationship between the Imagist and the haiku movement. I'm just sharing a small commentary on Bounds in a station of the metro.
Yes.
Well, as one can tell by Bounds' use of the word hoko, he clearly had haiku in mind when writing the poem. However, according to the modernist principle of making it new, Bound does not simply copy haiku, but adapts it to the modern word of subway station and anonymous faces in the crowd. The form of Bound's poem differs also from the classical haiku. It has only 2 lines and more than 17
we said the difference is in the rigid structure.
Yes. However, like many haiku, it does juxtapose 2 different images. Other ancient short form were made new by the Imagists, most notably the 4-line Chinese lyric and the short poems and fragments from ancient Greece collected in the Greek mythology. Thank you.
Thank you, Khulud. Right, very good. Anyone else would like to share anything? I would like to ask Ahmed to read it again, please, before we start. Ahmed Dadir.
Yes, Doctor.
Would you read your, poem again, please?
Yes, of course, I would like. Okay, the sun has been set. There are no stars in the sky over the Sea of Gaza.
Right, good. Right, I expect some of you to read their own poems next time. Well, right, Nadia, would you put down your hand, please? Nadia, unless you have something else to say. Okay, well, we are going to today to continue with the development of poetry in the 20th century. We said last time that the greatest development that started in poetry was the rise of the Imagist movement, and we gave you examples as well as, right? But if we would like to explain the basic principles of Imagism, we will say the following: that the lines must be short, of a musical cadence rather than metrical regularity. What does this mean? That what they cared about, that the lines must be short and to be musical, not necessarily to have a regular meter, not necessarily to have a regular meter, right? This is according to the American, right, Imagism, not the Japanese haiku. The Japanese haiku is rigid, must have a kind of metrical regularity, okay, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, right, according to what, to their own rules. But to them, the Americans, I mean Pound, Eliot, and others, and Williams, that it must be musical, but not necessarily to have regular meter. To avoid abstraction, and this is very, very important, to avoid abstraction and to treat the image with hard, clear precision. I mean that all the function of the poem is to draw an image, concrete image in a precise manner. A hard, clear precision rather than symbolic intent. And this is another one. It means that no symbolism, no abstraction. No intention, no symbolic intention, no abstract meaning, but all what he needs to do, I mean the poet is supposed to draw an image, a clear, precise image, right? This is the second principle of what? Of Imagism. The third one, freedom of rhythmic composition. What do we mean by that some poems are rhythmic and some poems might not be rhythmic? The rhythm is how many beats you can make, right, while you are reading the poetic line. To them, even the rhythm or the rhythmic composition is not necessary. Is not necessary. It is not necessarily to have rhythmic poetry, right? That the number of beats is a slow number of beats, or right, it might be what? Okay, a fast number of beats. No, what they care about, a musical cadence, to be musical, right? To be short, to be precise and clear, no abstraction, no symbolism, no rhythm, no metrical regularity, no metrical regularity. But what is important? The direct treatment of the subject. The subject here, it refers to the image, that you have to refer to treat the image, right, whether objectively or subjectively. So they never care, right, the objectivity of poetry or the subjectivity of poetry, whether the poet says I, my, right? It doesn't mean that they don't use it. They might use it, but okay, they don't insist that it is supposed to be subjective all the time. If you want to write objectively, it's okay. If you want to write subjectively, it's okay. So, right, the persona, right, in their poem is not necessarily to reflect a kind of subjectivity or a kind of objectivity at all. They never cared about these things, right? What they care, paint by words, precise image, concrete image, beautiful image, leave the space to the reader to identify the meaning as he likes, to like it or dislike it. All what you need is to draw as a poet. Well, the second development in the field of poetry in the 20th century, it was the rise of the metaphysical wit. Again, the metaphysical poetry appeared at the end of the Elizabethan age, after the death of William Shakespeare. After the death of William Shakespeare came John Donne, right? John Donne and a group of others, they started a kind of poetry which is written around what we call it a prolonged imagery. This prolonged imagery is weird in nature. We call it the conceit. What is the conceit? Usually the conceits are, right, prolonged images, prolonged long, images that usually connects two or more unlike things. Two or more unlike things. What I mean that whenever you read the poems of John Donne, right, you will figure out, oh my God, what is the relation between A and B, right? Some of them, especially, I mean, John Donne, at the end of his own career, started to write religious poetry. And although some people, they say they are not religious, and he was not actually a religious person, yet, right, we call them religious sonnets. Religious sonnets. So the metaphysical word, it makes weird, strange, complicated, right, kind of poetry. This weird and complicated poetry, it requires a kind of wit, a kind of intellectual thinking in order to grasp it, grasp it. I will give a fast example from John Donne, right, in order to let you what do we mean by wit, by the metaphysical wit, right? A very famous poem for someone called, right, John Donne, it is called The Flea. It is called The Flea, F-L-E-A. يعني البرغوث, right? He talks about the flea, and right, he says that, right, when his beloved girl found a flea, and Bishop killed the flea. So he started talking to his beloved girl, telling her that you killed our love. So the first thing that comes to your mind, how come? Yani, the flea, البرغوث, how does it represent their own love? You will find inside the poem that he explains what he really means, that the flea first came to you and sucked your blood, and then jumped on me and sucked my blood. So both my blood and your blood are mixed inside that flea. So when you killed the flea, you killed our love, our union, right? Allah يقرف الاثنين. شكركم مبرممين. Well, this is what we call it, a kind of metaphysical what? صح يا زينة صح. What I mean, that this kind of prolonged imagery, strange connection, requires a kind of wit or a kind of intellectual activity in order to grasp the meaning. After the end of the metaphysical poetry, it is, I mean, died for centuries, died till the beginning of the 20th century again, right? Came Ezra Pound again, and T.S. Eliot again, right? They brought this type of metaphysical wit to poetry. They started using this type of weird imagery, right? And sometimes, right, this type of of imagery that requires a kind of intellectual activity in order to grasp it. And this is why we say that this type started to appear again in the modern poetry, right? Or what we call it in the school of modernism, So this, although it died during the Victorian age and during the Romantic age, but now it appeared again. Why? Because they were, right, it was actually the difficulty of life, the complexity of life. It required a kind of complex imagery in order to portray the meaning. And this is my only explanation. Why did the poets at the beginning of the 20th century, right, came to use the metaphysical wit again? I would say it is because of the complexity of man, because of the complexity of life. It required a kind of complex imagery in order to portray it. Well, so a third development, a failure actually, and not development. They tried to simplify the poetic language. There were attempts to simplify the poetic language, but these attempts failed. And I want you to pay attention to this, that they wanted to make it as simple as possible, but they couldn't. I mean, the language of poetry, right, remained sublime language, which is not at the level of the common man, like the language that was used during the Romantic period. So the simplification, although these attempts might happen more than once, but still the language of poetry keeps its own complexity of its own. Right, a great usage of irony in the poetic discourse. Well, right, I usually say irony is the tool of the helpless. Is there anyone who can help me to explain this? Irony is the tool of the helpless. Well, yes, Nadia.
Yeah, it's like saying that people who are not able to kind of who are like weak and are not able to make a real change, they turn to something that's funny to kind of to ridicule something that they really don't have power over.
يا سلام عليكي يا سلام. Right, قطعت نادية قول كل خطيب. زينة.
So I think it means that when life becomes unbearable, it's kind of like what Nadia said. When life comes unbearable, they just like kind of make it into a joke so it can be more tolerable.
Yes. If you cannot
Can
solve
I add
it,
something, Doctor?
ايوه يا زينة، مين مملوك هذه ولا مين اللي معايا؟
Asil.
أسيل اتفضلي.
I think irony actually, he uses irony to make the audience expect or emphasize on his idea by mocking others, or to make what's said or as what expected is a successful way by using the irony.
شكرا أسيل, but it was already explained by Nadia and Zina, right? Because, right, I said that it is the tool of the helpless, because poets are not men of action. They cannot change the word. The word is too much difficult. It's painful, right? And the problems of the word cannot be solved by poetry. And therefore, instead of what? Instead, if you cannot change something, mock it, right? And this is exactly the reason behind the usage of the irony in the poetic discourse at the beginning of the 20th century. Too many problems that appeared, all right, okay, over all the world, as we talked, I mean, 2 classes ago, when we started talking about the, right, the concept of disillusionment, that the whole world is going mad, Poets cannot change these things, right? And therefore, the best reason in order not to go nuts, in order not to go right, is to what? Is to mock it. And this is why they started using the irony in the poetic discourse. One of the great developments in poetry, the emergence of 2 schools, right? 2 different schools. The first school, we call it Eliot, T.S. Eliot as a school. T.S. Eliot, right? T.S. Eliot is actually, right, he had, I mean, followers who, because he was so great, to the extent that others, they started to what? They started to follow the way he expresses himself, the way he uses the language, the way, right, he uses the images, he uses the referring to historical religious myths in order to explain himself, right? خليني اقول لكم ايش قصدي. بتعرفوا الشاعر الفلسطيني الان البرغوثي، تميم البرغوثي الان اصبح مدرسه. ليش؟ شوفوا كم واحد بيحاول يقلد اسلوب تميم البرغوثي سواء في الكتابه او في القراءه. يا زينه، would you like to say something؟ رفع ايدك لازلتي. Right?
Sorry, ضليت رفعها.
It's okay, no problem. What I mean that because he is so good, he is so good, you will find many people, they would like to be like him. They will use the same, structures, same words, similar words, or the way he reads poetry, right, or recites poetry, you will find people try to what? To mimic him. Why? Because he became a school. He became a school. He is so good. He is no longer a person. He is no longer a person. He became what? He became a school, right? And Eliot was like that. Eliot, right, was not a person. He became a school. And this school, it combined, right, three things, right? Three elements, important elements in their own writing. The first one, which is Imagism, and we talked about it. Then the metaphysical wit, and we talked about it. And also he used the French symbolism. French symbolism, why? Because, right, this is how they call it, the symbolism, which is actually sometimes weird symbolism. This is why we call it the French symbolism. So anyone who uses these things will belong to what? To the school of Eliot, will belong. The other poet who became also a school, it was William Butler Yeats. William Butler Yeats is the finest poet in the 20th century. I like him. I like him. Why? Because he has the ability not to use the language, but to create the language. To create the language, right? Some people, they used to what? To say about the language of William Butler Yeats that his language is crispy. What does it mean crispy? He has a crispy language. يعني مخبوزة طازة جديد بتقرش. I mean that he creates, bakes the language, right? And they call his language, it is not a normal language, it is a verbal magic. They call it a verbal magic. I mean, a new language of his own creation, right? Do you know William Shakespeare used to create the language? Yeats also used to create the language of his own. And in addition to the verbal magic, which is creating new language, he also combined the aesthetic school, right? The aesthetic movement, right? And we talked about the aesthetic movement and explained what it was. And he also, right, irony, right? He used irony and also the symbolism, which was used by T.S. Eliot himself, right? And William Butler Yeats became also a school. So this is the greatest development, all right, in poetry at the beginning of the 20th century. So Eliot became a school, Yeats became a school, right? A great usage of irony, right? Failure in simplifying the language, the rise of the metaphysical wit, as well as the first one, which is the rise of the Imagism. Well, I'm going to move now to the development of fiction. But if you have any question about the development of poetry, please do ask before I move to the development of fiction. Well, no questions, that's good, right? I assume that you understand, right? Fine. Yes.
Yes. Is Yeats an imagist?
No, he's not.
Yeah, because of the symbolism. Yeah. I get it.
Well, right, development of fiction. Okay, now, what is the greatest development of fiction? This is what I used to ask my students when I used to see them years ago, years in the class, right? I forgot, right, how to lecture, right, people inside the class now. We are making all our classes online, and this is the poorest way of teaching, right? Because I don't see the response of my students. I don't know who is paying attention and who is with me and who is sleeping in front of the monitor, or maybe someone is cooking. Well, one of the students one day told me, right, that the size of the novel became less. I told him, great, wallahi, you did well. Wallahi, this is one of the best developments, that the fiction in the Victorian age, it was what? Okay, very big in size. And now the fiction, right, in the 20th century, do you know why? Is there anyone to tell me why? عارفين السؤال ولا أعيده؟
Yes,
بتول.
doctor.
Repeat it, please.
All right. When I
think
used to ask my student in Sunday class, what do you think the difference between the fiction in the 20th century and the fiction in the Victorian age? One of the students I remember, he said that the modern fiction is right, is smaller in size than the Victorian, novels and fiction. I said, yes, you are great. But do you know why?
Can I answer?
Because I think it was social in nature.
All right, social nature. One, thank you. Someone else. Nadia?
Yes, hello.
Batul
Okay,
Gabil,
Batul
Batul Gabil.
Yes, doctor. I think uh, people now became like they want to make everything in shorter time. They even, for example, for most of us, when we have a post on Facebook, we like the post which is shorter and have a clear meaning more than having a long post.
All right,
Maybe
thank you very much.
it's the same.
Right. Okay,
People don't have the
ولاء
same
ولاء
time.
الفرة.
Yeah, I think that maybe because like writers during the Victorian time, they would use a lot of imaginary events, and like most of the themes are a marriage, and like they it's about life. So their novels would be big in size because they tackle the marriage and these stuff. So it would take some space when writing. I don't know. That's what I did.
Thank you, ولاء. Reem.
Yes, as you said, the last time that in the Victorian age, their themes were not realistic. They were writing about either two different extremes, so the characters are either too good or too bad.
No, I'm talking about the size of the novel. I mean that okay, the novel in the Victorian age was at least 500 pages, right? But now you will find a novel which is also, almost 100 page or less than 100 page. Why? Nadia?
I think because like the 20th century literature is more philosophical and complex, so it just tells something symbolically, and like it's very precise in size. But like the Victorian novel is very like descriptive, and like there are a lot of conversations and events that are like very loosely talked about. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, you did well, all of you. Right, because the fiction in the 20th century, right, it became a fiction of ideas. Right, as Nadia just now. I mean that fiction in the Victorian age, it was social fiction about what we call it the biographical novel. What is the biographical novel? It goes from the time someone is born till he becomes happy at the end, right? Or maybe a love story from the time it starts till it ends happily at the end. A biographical novel, right, usually becomes, it has external conflict between the rich and the rich family and the poor family, two different classes in the society. The conflict is an external conflict, okay, and right, the novel is biographical in nature, and right, it talks about something external, not reflecting ideas. And this is why it required more space to explain the conflict, how to be resolved. Something else, some people in the Victorian age, especially Charles Dickens, they used to write for making living. Do you know what? that he used to publish every 2 weeks, part of what he never published, all right, one novel, one shot. No, but the novels they usually, right, published every 2 weeks in a local magazine, in a local newspaper. And the more, right, the longer the novel, right, that the more money he gets. عشان هيك كان يخليها بدل 1000 تصير 2000. Do you understand what I mean? That they used to make living of writing, right? So the longer the novel, right, the more money he can get for his own life. Well, but in the modern time, that the fiction served ideas more than, and the conflict is more internal than being external. And this is why it doesn't require a lot. It doesn't require a lot. So when we say in 1910 till 1940 became the heroic age of the modern novel. By the way, the modern, time, right, that it made advancement in all genres, in poetry, in fiction, in drama, even in the critical theory, unlike other ages. We'll find that the one that made advancement during the Victorian age, it was the novel, right? In the Romantic age, it was the poetry, and so on and so forth. In the Elizabethan age, it was the drama. But in the 20th century, you will find the advancement happened to all genres: the poetry, right, the fiction, right, the tragedy, and the critical theory as well. And this is why we say that the modern literature is as great as, right, the Elizabethan age in the field of drama. Well, so why? Because sometimes you find the great writers, they are born at the same time. Great musicians are born at the same time. Great leaders are born and they live together, right? And sometimes you find nothing, right? But you will find in England, for example, right, Joseph Conrad, D.H. Lawrence, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and many others, tens of writers. In England, I'm not talking about America. In America, it was, all right, the same. Great writers, they lived at the same time. And I'm wondering, right, that sometimes you find a period of time which has great leaders, and, all right, long times they don't have any leader. How come? I don't know. The same applies to writers. The same applies on musicians. The same applies on painters, right? And therefore, why this one is golden, right? Because they made a new type of fiction. This type of fiction became different, completely different from the Victorian novel in two things, in attitude and in technique. Some might ask, what do you mean by attitude and technique? Yes, right. These are two big titles I need to explain. That the Victorian novel is different from the modern novel in the attitude and in the technique. Technique means technique of writing. The attitude means what is written about, right? That it is different about the topic of writing, the attitude, the values, right? What is important to write about, and the technique of writing, right? And the technique of writing is completely different from, right, what we call it, the chronological technique of writing in the Victorian age. Let's start with the first one, the attitude. What do we mean by attitude? How different was the modern novel, right, from the Victorian age? The attitude towards what? What was significant in the human experience during the Victorian age is no longer important. For example, can you, at the time of war, write about, right, poems of love? If you can, it means that you are an idiot. You are separated from what? You are separated from your own what surrounding. You are separated from your own reality. والله كان في واحد صاحبنا على الفيسبوك يا جماعة إنه الحرب قاعدة بتقصف وهو بيكتب قصائد حب على الفيسبوك. كنت أقول يا الله إيش هذا الزلمة؟ من وين عايش؟ من وين هذا الزلمة؟ Right? Whatever the case is. يطلع من المود والله لا هو مود ولا نيلة. متمسح.
مش بالدنيا أصلا هو يعني.
لا I mean he is separated from his own reality. مفصول عن الواقع. Right? So what was significant for the Victorians? It was socialism, social advancement, better life, getting social justice. These things, they were the topic: marriage, family. These are the values or the experiences that the Victorians were writing about. But these, right, are no longer significant. زي ما احنا بنقول عقبال حجك والناس مروحة. You cannot write about them. You will be idiot if you write in the 20th century about the same topics that were, I mean, famous in what? During the Victorian age. You cannot, right? So what was significant in the human experience during the Victorian age disappeared, right? And at the same time, they cannot reflect reality, because reality is a reality of death, a reality of war, a reality of what? A reality of abuse, a reality of tyranny. So the past is no longer important, right, to write about. And the present is not actually intuitive, I mean inspirative. I mean that provides a kind of inspiration to write about, because the reality is an ugly reality. The values of the modern time, the values of violence, the values of what? Of power, they are not good values to write about. What should they write about? The modern novelists started to create values rather than depending on the previous or the existing values. They started to depend on their intuition, right? Do you know what does it mean, depending on their intuition? Why? Because the past values are not significant, and the current values are values of tyranny, and therefore they started to what? They started to create values. I'm explaining here. The values of the Victorian social life vanished, right? To give way to more personal values. They built up values rather than drawing on the existing values. So now the modern novel started to reflect a kind of values which are not reflecting the existing reality, nor reflecting the previous life or values in the Victorian age. Well, right. Also, the conflict became more internal than external. In the modern fiction, the conflict is no more, right, external. One of the most important novels in the 20th century is called Ulysses for James Joyce. James Joyce, about a character, right? The whole novel, right, is about character who goes at night, right, wandering in the streets of Dublin, and we are jumping into the mind. He thinks about what his own life going through, right? So all night he moves into, right, the streets of Dublin, right? Before the sunrise, he committed suicide. Right, I have a phone, all right, it is only 1 minute, please. Right, so again, I'm coming back saying that the conflict is inside man, not outside him. And this what also led to a kind of what we call it, okay, the psychological novel, right? The technique, the difference in the technique is the technique of writing, which was influenced by the development of science, development of philosophy, and development of psychology, right? That the technique of writing after Freud became a little bit difficult. Why? Because Freud brought the idea of the conscious and the subconscious. And the most important thing, that all our conscious actions are attributed to subconscious motives. Again, so writers started to take into consideration the subconscious more than the conscious. Started talking about the subconscious motives rather than the conscious actions. Freud says that all our conscious actions are usually attributed to subconscious motives. Subconscious motives. So knowing the difference between what is conscious, which is the actual action that we usually do in life, and the interpretation of the motives behind that action, right, is completely different. So writers started to focus on the subconscious, the explanation, the psychological explanation of our conscious more than the conscious action itself. Also science, and especially the idea of time, and whether the time is linear or circular, or the time is actually, right, and also the Einstein's idea of time, of relativity of time, it affected, right, the writers in a way that their understanding of the concept of time became permanent, became important, right, in their own writing. What I mean, that they started to realize that time, right, in the process of narration is completely important, right? The narration previously, it had only, chronological order: the past, the present, and the future. And in the present, sometimes we have, right, foreshadowing, or we have flashback. This is what right, used to be in the writing of the Victorians and even before the Victorians. But as long as we understand that time is not only linear, right, and it can be circular or a spiral, and or whatsoever, we started to think, right, that this time is not necessarily to be biographical and chronological, but we can shift according to the time shifts of the mind. The mind is illogical. It shifts from the past to the present, and from the present to the future in a single moment. I can be here, and I can be with you, and in the supermarket, and right when I was 10 years old, right, while I'm here in one moment. Why? Because the time shifts of the minds are illogical. So writers started to rely on the time shifts of the mind after their understanding of the concept of time after the relativity of Einstein. Murad Albitar, do you have something to say? Murad? Well.
Sorry دكتور بالغلط.
ماشي. So they started to rely on the conscious and the subconscious by Sigmund Freud. Realization of time and Einstein's relativity of time. Also the collective dream of redeeming time. To redeem time, why? That to save time from the hardships, the difficulties that it is living, which is the philosophy of salvation or redemption, redeeming time, or the philosophy of salvation. It affected the technique, and what was the result? Something we call it the stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness as a technique of writing, it depended on the conscious and the subconscious. the subconscious more than the conscious, right? Okay, action. Then also relied, okay, on the time shifts of the mind, the time shifts of the mind. I'm quite sure that this is not the first time you hear about the stream of consciousness, but I'm telling you how, right? Okay, again, saying that the stream of consciousness, it is a kind of writing which records what goes in the mind of the character, the major character. And as we said, that the mind of the major character is illogical. It doesn't follow the chronological order of thinking, but it moves or shifts between the future, the present, and the past without logic, So the chronological order of the biographical fiction in the Victorian age became the stream of consciousness of the fiction of ideas in the 20th century. هذه الخلاصة. But the greatest development, right, in the fiction is this. What is it? The greatest development of fiction is not it, is the rise of the short story as a literary genre. Short story is the invention of the 20th century. No one wrote short story before. So the short story, it became what we call it the short fiction. Why? Because human beings are only expressing an idea. You can express it in a long novel, or you can express it in a short form, a shorter form, which is the short story. So the greatest development in fiction is actually the short story. Well, do you have any question before I move to the development of drama?
Yes, I want to ask about the collective dream point about the philosophy of salvation. I didn't really get it.
Well, the collective dream, that most writings before the 20th century, it was singular in nature, right? That writers, they aimed at personal objectives in their own writing, either to be famous, either to achieve richness, to become rich, or whatsoever, right? Usually they have what we call it personal objectives behind writing. But in the modern time, writers started to feel the dilemma of a human being, the fall of man and the fall of civilization, that it made this time is actually a time of death. So they felt that they need to make a kind of a better life to live in. How to do that? This is a collective dream, not a personal dream. So they used to write in order to make life better, in order life not for themselves, but for everyone, for redeeming time from the burdens that it is living in. And therefore, right, what we say that the motives behind writing were not personal motives, but it was a collective dream. What is that collective dream? A better world to live in. Especially after the Second World War, the First World War, the one that we talked about, right? That man needed to be reminded, as if it is a wake-up call for all humanity. Wake up. We need to what? To save ourselves. We need a savior. We are not making life better for us. We are making it better, but with I, not with E. We need someone to save us. So that collective dream here, that the writers started to reflect that collective dream of a better life, to save the time. Saving the time here, saving humanity means. And this is what we call it the philosophy of salvation. We need a savior, right? بتلاقيش انه احنا في عز دين لما نكون في عز دين الهزيمه بنقول احنا محتاجين كمان صلاح الدين. من وين؟ لانه صلاح الدين بالنسبه لنا هنا ايش؟ السيفير. ومن قله صلاح الدين بنقول يا رب الله يجيب لنا صلاح الدين. This is a collective dream because Salah ad-Din is not going to liberate me alone. It's going to liberate the whole nation. So this is a collective dream. Did you get the point, Nadia? Please, if you did, say yes.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, anyone else? All right, so we will move to the development of drama in the 20th century. I would like to say that what we are going to discuss now about the development of drama, I discussed before in the course of drama. I mean, those who took with me a drama course, right? We discussed the modern drama with the same development. So, right, those who they can refer to what we talked about before. If not, you can listen, right, to them right now. Right, so drama in the modern time can be divided into two stages: pre-war drama and post-war drama. War here, it refers to the Second World War, the Second World War. So we divided drama or its development, right, into two stages, from 1900 till 1945, the first half of the century. And after the end of the Second World War, we had, right, also another kind of drama. So we will talk first about the pre-war drama, right, and how it was developed. And also after we finish it, we will talk about the post-war drama. But I have to remind you that the drama during the Victorian age, it died. And during the Romantic age, it also died. I mean that drama was never ranked first or even second during the Victorian age and the Romantic age, right? The greatest age of drama before the 20th century, it was the Elizabethan age. And the 20th century, right, exposed a new type of drama, which is as great as the Elizabethan age, but shorter in size as well. And do you know why? Why?
Internal and external themes.
Because it is a drama of ideas. It is what? A drama of ideas. Well, right, let me say this. At the beginning of the 20th century, كان في حج اسمه John Galsworthy. John Galsworthy, يعني, as we usually say in Arabic, سبع صنايع والبخت ضايع. He was a poet, a short story writer. He was a dramatist, a novelist. He was يعني, one of the finest writers, to me at least, right? But John Galsworthy was the first one to make a kind of revival for, right, the plays, and it started with the one-act play, right? John Galsworthy, right, had a humanitarian outlook on life. That, okay, because he felt, right, the greatest catastrophes humanity are living, he started to write in a humanitarian sense. What do I mean by humanitarian sense? That all people are good, all people are the same, we should not fight, okay? He views the poor and the rich are the same. He wants this world to become a better world, right? By what? By reflecting this humanitarian outlook in which, right, that every people are the same and good, right? But later, right, we will say that there is a kind of what we call it the beginning of the social drama, right? the beginning of the social drama, which tries to remedy the social problems in the British community. But this social drama, it was completely domestic, I mean, right, about the countryside. We call it domestic social tragedies. It reflects social problems in the suburban society of England, and it tries to fix them by showing that every person is good, all the people are good, right? There is no difference between the poor and the rich. ويلا يا شباب خليكم كويسين وما تتقتلوش مع بعض. Right? بنفعش هذا الجمال, right? Then after that, what happened? A new development with the establishment of the Irish theatre. Irish theatre, we never had the Irish voice before the 20th century. I mean that they were not distinguished as being separate from the English. But in the 20th century, they started to be separated from the English. And the great writers or dramatists of that time, right? William Butler Yates, he is a finest poet, we said just now, and John Millington Synge. And John Millington Synge succeeded as a dramatist. But William Butler Yeats, although he is the finest poet in the 20th century, but he was failure as a dramatist. No one knows him as a dramatist. What kind of death? What kind of, drama that appeared, right, in the Irish theatre? Okay, we say that the Irish theatre reflected impressive, realistic peasant drama. The peasants, right, the people in the villages, the people in the villages. And it talks about their own problems, and they were usually one active place. They were usually one active place, right? One of the famous plays for John Millington Synge, it was, right, the Riders to the Sea, which is very famous as, right, the plays of William Shakespeare in the modern time. It talks about a group of people who are fishermen living right beside the sea, and a woman who lost her husband and 6 of her own children, right, as fishermen in different storms. And she tried to prevent her final son from going to the sea in order to work, right, but he refuses, right, and he goes to the sea but comes back again dead, right, the last one, the 7th one. So it is actually human emotional oozing type of drama that makes you chill while you are, right, reading it. And all this drama, it was rooted in the Irish soil. It means that it was completely Irish. For the first time, the Irish people are identified as being Irish, not as being British. As if they are completely different. They don't belong to the GB or the Great Britain. No Great Britain anymore. No Great Britain anymore, but it reflects the Irish, right, literature. Then came Bernard Shaw. Bernard Shaw is, right, the father of modern drama of ideas. Why? Because he wrote, you know, that he was a socialist. Do you know what I mean by socialist? Not socialist from the society, but from socialism. يعني كان اشتراكي, right? And he used to the stage as a platform for socialist propaganda. That he used the stage in order to make propaganda for socialism, in order to make a kind of marketing for his own philosophy of socialism, right? And this is why we call it, okay, drama of ideas. Drama of ideas, because it talks about a philosophical idea which is socialism, He established the drama of ideas, as I just told you, right? And after that came, right, a group of dramatists, Oscar Wilde, John Millington Synge, and Lady Gregory, and made what we call it the re-establishment of comedy of manners. Not the establishment, but re-establishment. In other words, right, that it was established long ago, it died, and they made what a kind of re-establishment of the comedy of manners. What is the comedy of manners? It is the comedy, right, which is usually satirical, portrays the manners and the fashions of a particular class, making fun of the manners and way of living of a certain people. بنقول اوكي اهل حمامه بيعملوا نكت على اهل المجدل. Right? This is a comedy of manners. The way they eat, the way they get married, the way they speak, right? This is, we call it what? The comedy of manners and fashions of a particular class. But actually, Oscar Wilde and John Millington Synge, they did not stop by the comedy of manners, but they wrote, right, something else. But Lady Gregory, right, was, I mean, kept writing about the comedy of manners. Then we have the post-war drama. The post-war drama, which is from 1945 onwards, or what we call it, the new drama. The new drama. Well, what do we have in the new drama? تعبتوا زهقتوا بشوف عندي الحضور 62 من اليوم وطالع بدي ابدا اخذ حضور وياهم. اول يوم كان في 100 وشيء، اليوم عندي كام؟ 62. الان بدي ابدا اخذ حضور وغياب. اوكي؟ عشان هيك يعني اللي بدهاش تحضر براحتها. الحضور والغياب عندي مهم جدا، والاسئله كلها تبعتي مش من السلايدز. انتم شايفين السلايدز ما فيش فيها ربع اللي بقوله. So you have to attend, you have to write notes, right? Well, so the post-war drama, okay, it did not have a change in the style from the pre-war drama, but actually, right, it was having the same, what we call it, style, but different in the subject matter. Well, sisters, I'm going to stop here. I have a sore throat. I have been talking for a long time, and I think I need to rest. If you have 2 questions, we will start from here next time, and I will start talking about, okay, the first play that we are going to talk about, which is the Look Back in Anger, after I finish the development of the post-war drama. Do you have any questions? Any questions? Sisters? Allah afikum. No. Okay then. الله يعطيكم ألف عافية. نراكم إن شاء الله يوم الثلاثاء الساعة 3 إن شاء الله. يلا مع السلامة.